Welcome to another episode of Judgement Date, which of course are a series of programs we're doing to help people through the lockdown, to discuss issues which have come up throughout the lockdown and which we'll probably have to deal with when the lockdown is over. And it's a great delight to have Ravi Naidoo here to talk to me. Although he's, I think, in the private sector, now I can qualify that, in which they do development work, very important development work. He's held very important positions at the DBSA and in the Department of Trade and Industry. But what really struck me and prompted me to ask him to come and chat was an article that he wrote yesterday or the day before in the Daily Maverick about why we shouldn't waste this crisis. So, Ravi, let me start with that. I mean, we are in crisis, but your suggestion is that actually we shouldn't be quite gloomy if we can seize the opportunity to do a series of really important things. Have I read you right?
Yes, no, you have, Dennis. Well, we have been in a bit of a crisis for quite a while now, actually.
Yeah.
And so I think the situation is such now that it's forcing us to take action and also to bring constituencies, I think, closer together with a shared pain that might make it easier to actually now implement. Whereas before it was someone else's problem, it's easy to say, well, it's not really for us. That's a problem they must deal with some other time. Now it's very much, well, it's all of us, and it's also very much an issue which is now. So that does create a bit of a window, in terms of the institutional situation anyway, to push something through that we know we have always had to do, but now the timing is probably good to do it. So it's not something we wish for, but certainly one must take advantage of the situation, for the public good.
But I suppose let me start with this before we get to what you were suggesting. I take your point. We've been talking about structural change and all sorts of things for goodness knows how long. Why will we be able, when this is over? I mean, is it the sheer horror of it, or will politics have changed?
To be able to do what? Sorry, Dan.
To bring about some serious changes. Sorry, I wasn't being precise. What I mean is, okay.
Yes, I mean, why would we be able to do it now?
Yes.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there's a combination of things that probably are moving a solution forward, right? One, I think we do have a good leader in terms of the president being a good person to bring together different parties. He's got a good track record. He's quite credible. I think he understands issues politically and technically, so that's good. That's an asset for South Africa and for us. I think also the situation is such that globally, we are now doing things in the world that we thought were unthinkable a few years ago. I mean, just imagine 1/3 or 40% of the world locked down. Who would have thought such a thing is possible? And they can just do it. So things that people thought were impossible are now happening. And I think also what's very important is the issue we are dealing with is really showing up. It's showing up the class. The class divide, the actual economic divide, is being untenable. So I think it's a rare moment where our economic structure and social relations are becoming quite visible. Because
I think that's absolutely true.
So now what happens in townships is of great concern to us in the suburbs, and
because we've messed around. Not being able to deal with the spatial geography of apartheid now for 26 years. I mean, I keep on banging on about it, but it's an unbelievably monstrous mistake that we've made.
Yes, and of course now your high wall and your electric fence are not going to protect you from what's out there. So I think that's a good thing, and I think what's also happening is the realization that. This is not something that's just going to be a once-off situation. We are likely, as years go on, well, as likely as not, to find that there will be repeat situations which will be not dissimilar to this. And having the world's worst levels of, or the most or the most unequal economic structure, the world's worst Gini coefficients, put us at great risk, and that we have to deal with it. So I think it's a combination of those things which is making it more plausible for us to actually act in a way that maybe, a few years ago would have been unthinkable.
Yeah, the reason I started this conversation like this is because when I read your column, which I don't have any difficulty with, I mean, you tracked something which was really important, that we've had wasted years in which we didn't seize the opportunity, and we have got levels of inequality and poverty and tepid growth. I mean, I think it was in your column you rightly point out that the growth rates that were predicted in the budget were nothing short of pathetic.
Yes, so we have set our bar very low, over the years, and look, the fact is, in 1996, I was looking at it again. Our Gini coefficient was 0.61, right?
0.61. Sorry, is that what you said? 1.61.
This was in 1996.
Mm-hmm.
Had us down at 0.61, which is one of the worst in the world in terms of levels of equity. And in 2020, I think we are 0.63.
Correct.
Worse. And if you go back to the 1990s as well, the level of unemployment was pretty high. We are quite up there in the world. I mean, above what the US was during the Great Depression. And 25 years later, we are still heading in that direction. So we know the things we were doing, just measured on those metrics, were not working. And we can continue to work like that and say, oh, well, it's just around the corner, we keep doing what we're doing. And we know that's not the case. And so we have to get quite serious about the things that we need to change. And I think part of it is there are some things which might be a bit uncomfortable with the changes. And that's why we always put it off, and it's someone else's problem. And I think recent events are just showing that we are running out of runway.
But I wonder whether it was everybody else's problem or the inability for a coherent, single-minded, clear policy which gives consistency and predictability to everybody, that was our problem. That because of political infighting, we've not had, in other words, because you used the Great Depression, I can't help but feeling, what about a South African New Deal, which would launch us in a direction which you and I presumably would like to take us.
Yes, that's right. So obviously, at a moment of crisis, at a moment where you come to this inflection point where something must change, right? And like the New Deal, in the US was, they got to that point when the stock market had totally crashed and unemployment was rocketing in the high 20s, which is still below where we are. And they got to the point where they realized the economic model was not going to work anymore. And they were going to have to do a counter-cyclical measure. The government was going to have to step in and take up the slack in demand in the economy, and they were going to create employment and give money to people who were then going to spend the money doing jobs which weren't always terribly meaningful jobs necessarily, but some public job or the other, and that was going to put demand back into the economy. It's going to put spending.
What was crucial about? Sorry to interrupt, but what was crucial about the New Deal, which is why I'd like to probe you, is the New Deal essentially, for the first time, in America, in a sense developed something, I know Americans don't like to call it that, but it was a form of social democracy in which the state was really central to powering initiatives that take it forward. Now, curiously, what COVID-19 has shown right across the world is the state is still damn important. I mean, even neoliberals have had to chuck out their playbooks for the interim. So the question I suppose I'm asking is, can our state do that? I mean, Are we capable of being able to do? Let me take a couple of the suggestions you've made. You talk about small and medium-sized businesses being encouraged. Well, the state's got to do something about that, presumably.
Yeah.
We need to have some infrastructural projects, I think you mentioned. Again, that requires, I mean, you've worked there. You've been in the Department of Trade and Industry. You're in the Development Bank, not the state, but you've seen it at first hand. So is it fixable?
Yes, no, it's completely fixable. It is completely fixable, and it's something that it can be done. It's looking at how you would improve on our experience from the past. We have had, and of course, Dennis, you are a warrior from the many wars and in the trenches.
Like you, yes, we're both rather getting older, aren't we?
Yes. So I've been involved in a number of processes which actually worked. And
yes.
They worked under very particular circumstances. So I think it's also, one can predict what makes something work and what makes something not work. And I think the focus on a capable state, what the state needs to do, quite a bit has been written about it. And I think, and we've also seen it in practice in terms of various processes. So I've got some thoughts on what would make it work. I think, what we need to look at is there's a set of things that must be done, like what would be the composition of a new deal, and then there's a question of how would you implement it. Right. So you can have a package. You can have a national development plan. You can have a strategy, which looks great. And we have so many of them, and some of them are really good strategies on paper. Mm-hmm. And then the second part is where we always fall down, which, in particular, big economic strategies, which is how you're going to execute this thing. And we always end up, like the job summits were a lovely process. And I spoke to people who were involved, and I said, we really wasted a lot of time.
Yeah, and money. Yes, I agree.
Time and money, and also, it doesn't help your credibility when you go through a whole process, and in the end, it's entirely voluntary to anyone as to whether or not they do the things they committed on paper, sometimes even signing to do. And so I think the second part, the execution part, is some very specific things that I would say, having looked at all the summits that we've gone through over the years, that would need to change.
So what would you, can I just ask you, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you would do if you were now Minister of Finance? I mean, the odd thing is that as we are talking to you, and I understand that they're having yet another one of the presidential economic experts. And I mean, frankly, I suspect that you and I could work that out in 5 minutes, what they're going to say, because that's not the point. It's the point of, these are the 2 or 3 things, we're going to do them, and they're going to be done in, that was the genius of Roosevelt. He actually got things done quickly. So what would be the 2 or 3? I mean, you've put down some in your article, but I'd like to tease them out if you could for people listening to this.
Yeah. So look, I would say just in terms of, let's start by sketching out what would be some of the key things you'd need to do from an economic strategy, right? And of course, there are so many recipes going out there, but I suppose the key things you would have to do, so the first role of the state, which is important, is that the role of state needs to play a role as a lead designer of an economic strategy. It's not going to have all the answers, but it has to be the one running the kitchen. Right, it's the one running the kitchen. So it's very much a lead designer role, and the lead designer role, I would say, the first thing it needs to do is that we need to be able to stabilize certain aspects of the economy. Right? So the most important thing, and what I had said in the article, and I think it's generally agreed. It's much easier to keep a company alive than to try to create a new one. And we need as many rate-paying, revenue-generating businesses as we can get. So there's 2 components to that are very important. They do need to look at the support funds they can put in place for all the small business program, for all the small businesses. We obviously need to do a lot of that, but I think at least keep the ones that are actually running, to try to look at how we can keep them alive. And I think there's been a lot of thinking around that, but that's the one area. That has to be done separately from the stabilization of support for the larger companies, and particularly the very large ones, because you don't want to end up in a US 2008 sort of arrangement where they really just used it to raid the public finances and take money onto the balance sheets. So if we're working with a large listed company, then as a taxpayer bailout or support that's coming at some very concessional rate, we are effectively taking a stake in that business and betting that they're going to do well. And when they do well, they're going to pay us back. It's almost like a sovereign wealth fund by stealth, because effectively we're now taking a stake in your business at a huge discount. And when you do well, that's where money comes back. It's not a grant. We're just bailing it out, but the money comes back to us. But we can demand certain things of you, which is not just you pay us back, but now we helped you as a good citizen. You're going to be a good citizen. So I think that's a very important.
Can I just ask you, when you say a good citizen, sorry, what do you actually mean? So I'm the CEO of a large public company. I'm in trouble. I suppose Edgar's has gone in, so I can't use them as an example. But something like, not quite Edgar's, but one of the large companies that's in trouble. I get a number of million rand back from them. I survive. Lo and behold, next year I take the uptick, and I'm doing better. What would you want me to do?
Yeah, so obviously it would depend on how much money you have, right? You'd love to be able to help everyone that's job creating or important for jobs. But even if you look at Poland and let's say Denmark, what they've done is now, they said, look, we do have COVID relief funds, but we're not going to give it to companies that are registering in tax havens and not paying their own taxes back to Denmark, because we are giving you money, but you're not really a good corporate citizen as far as we're concerned. So I think where there are choices, you're going to have to choose between which company gets the money, and the one that is naturally putting more money back into the local economy should be first. Then we'd want to say, look, and that's a rich Denmark. We are not rich Denmark, sadly. So we would also have to then say, look, for a local firm here, I'm like your private equity investor, and you are a company in distress. If I'm coming in as a PE fund, as you would know, Dennis, you come in with a lot of demands. You really take a lot of things. Here, the public sector is saying, fine, we can come in, but we're not taking it obviously for private gain. But one thing we do want to leave behind with you is you are going to commit to a very big local supplier procurement program, right? Because you have to find a way to multiply and give back the support to the public like they're giving you. So you would have to then say, wherever you can replace imports and bring in local firms, you're going to do. You're going to have to have.
Is that where your promotion of small and medium-sized businesses would come in?
Yes, because then it links to the big firm to the small firm. Because you also there's no point supporting a small firm if there's no one to buy from them. So this is an opportunity to link the big firms to the smaller firms and say, look, we're going to help you mass market, but we really want to also ensure that you're doing as much procurement as you can from the local small businesses that we are also supporting, because that's how the model starts to pay for itself. I think the other part of the stabilization that's very important in the economic strategy, and that comes back to your traditional New Deal, is you want to make sure people have money to spend. And some of that money could even be money which is in the form of vouchers and things like that, which go back again to the business. So we can say, look, part of what we're going to give the communities in very deprived areas are vouchers, but they can use it in local businesses. So the state is again putting money into your hands, but we know where it's going. So it's more programmable. I mean, it's possible. But the social grants are also a very important part of that. And there are ways to make the social grants much smarter than they are and more future-proofed. But that's also where we have. So that's another asset we have, is that we have a pretty good social grant infrastructure. So I think that's all part of a stabilization program. I think that's very important to make sure there's money and it circulates to keep as many businesses alive as possible and also link customers to it. So I think that's very important. I would say we would also need to look at things that can boost confidence in the economy quickly. I would pick two things that are very important, which are close. The one is we know Eskom is going to go back to load shedding pretty much as soon as COVID stabilizes, because that's what they've said.
Yes, yeah.
And there's a huge opportunity there to just get renewables back moving into the economy. Money has been put in. It is a huge space for investment. It will again give some faith to people that we are dealing with longer term, or well, medium term problems, but it's also an investment area. I'll say a second, and that's good for productivity in the economy. So,
and by the way, if I could stop you there, that's the no-brainer. It's a political problem, not an economic problem, that has got us.
Exactly. The president just needs to put pressure on one or two ministers to say,
yeah, we know they are too, yeah.
And we have made commitments. So it's very important. And it's something which, again, is a multiplier effect to the economy. The second one, which is a very big multiplier effect to the economy, and I think, again, low-hanging fruit that will have a big impact, is the spectrum. We need to get the 5G and the spectrum moving, because, again, once that moves, it frees up a lot of space for the media industry and all kinds of things. And it's shown to have a big multiplier impact to the economy. And it's a positive thing which we should do anyway, but certainly if we do it now, it's a big boost to the economy.
Just to ask you on that one, if I could ask you on that one, the first one, I understand perfectly why we haven't done that. The second one, because I'm such a technological Luddite, get my head around 5G is like very hard. Getting my head around a computer is very hard. The question, I suppose, is why have we not managed to do that? What's been the obstacle there? Because again, it seems a no-brainer.
Yes, it's been one of those things that's been on the table for over 10 years. Right. A big part of it was the regulations around Department of Communications in those days. And they needed to, so they have to free up the spectrum by shifting to digital, and yes, and it would then create more space on as soon as you shift onto 5G, obviously you can start shifting everything onto that. Of course, it's much higher bandwidth, which has other implications because you draw down a lot more data on that. But once you shift the SABC and all the radio stations, you then create more radio space, which other people can then take. And obviously, it's a massive money spinner, right? Because you have to then work out, Vodacom is sitting with 50% of the market. And they'll now have to share with other people. And, these things then create their own dynamic, because you're trying to line up the different blocks that will come on stream. There's Vodacom, MTN, then there's Telkom, and then there's a whole lot of new players who have to be brought in, and then who goes in foot. You can just imagine some of the behind-the-scenes discussions and strategizing around it. So I think it's mostly been bureaucratic delays. There's nothing technical as far as I understand, because it was a deadline we were supposed to have met in 2015, if I'm not mistaken.
So this is again a political question. I mean, you get people into the room, if you're the leader, you knock heads together and you say, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it.
As far as I know, it was already done in Lesotho, so there's nothing technical that we are unable to do. And so I think those are the kind of industry things, if we were to do it, and it's not these are not neoliberal strategies. These are just good, sensible things any social democracy, well-run capitalist economy must do, that free up resources and boost the economy. So I think if we can do some of those things, it's great. We're stabilizing and we're boosting the economy, so it's positive in a sense. I think the third thing you'd have to do in the strategy is we would also then have to start looking at, which we can do now, much more long-term focused things, but start them now. So we know we are moving into a digital economy. This is only accelerating that process. The fact that we're having this session that all of us are,
and we're going to use this much more. I mean, for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah. So I do think that there are investments that have to be made into the new economy, which will again, I think, backlink to education and training, and it might also help think through the kind of school syllabus that we can introduce, which might also deal with deficiencies in teaching. It's a lot easier to teach people digital things than it is to try to go to do the old syllabus. So even in the poorest areas, people have access to the cell phones, smartphones. All of that is becoming quite ubiquitous. So I think on the economic strategy, there is a stabilization, there is a boosting economic growth and confidence thing that I mentioned, and there's a future-proofing components that have to be brought in that are very important. I would say that the question then for all of this, including the package, is where's the money coming from, which is very important. And I think that's a second role of the state, because the role of the state is then, again, it's not to fund everything. It's not the 1950s. The state is in a way, think of it like a giant investment company. Just imagine Norway. Norway is pretty much an investment company now because of their sovereign wealth fund. The state is simply facilitating the money, and it's putting in the risk capital. That's what it's doing. So the money they need is not to pay for the whole thing. They just need to put something on the table to get the programs going, to offer the guarantees, cover the first 20% of the costs, and then bring the money into the private sector.
But if you take the two things, sorry to interrupt you, but if you take the two things that you've mentioned, your two key factors, on the question of generating greater energy capacity, there is money out there. There are green funds. There are all sorts of things. We can access money. On the question of the IT, as you've already indicated, it's going to make massive profits. It can't be difficult to actually get it up and running.
So exactly. So if you look at the green funding for the renewables, there is a massive amount of concessional money available already that can come into a program, and all the South African government will have to put in there with Eskom is a portion of what the cost would be. And over time, that'll be less and less, because you're really funding just the first phases. You're almost like, what you're doing is akin to putting in first loss capital, into the program.
And so carry on.
So the state's role is almost to be the transaction, the team that puts the transaction together and then does the first bit of funding. I mean, that's the way I would look at it, because you've got the new development bank, which is prepared to put in big amounts of money, and they only fund big state programs. So they will also be a funder with the Green Fund in any renewable. Look, you have international money. I know that if there is money available, even through the IMF, that could be got on not such terrible terms, potentially, or in theory anyway.
Yeah.
But, and they do owe, I think, up to 80 billion. South Africa can get. We are also sitting with something else which is very interesting, which is in the government space, which is we can regulate very intelligently what we do, with the fact that we have the most private sector, let's say, investment funds in the world, right? So from the one weird thing about South Africa is historically we had more pension provident funds than anywhere else in the world per capita. It's a little known fun fact that we had, I think, literally 20. I think you remember back in the day of all those committees, you got like 20,000 funds in South Africa, and they consolidate them now. I think they're about 2,000. But they are all looking for intelligent ways to invest their money that are commercially sensible, and it is possible to put a very good construct together under the present circumstances that is in the interests of the pensioners whose money it is. So everyone wants the country to work. So there is quite a bit of thinking has gone into that, and I think certainly it's something the state here should think about.
So, as I've got to draw this to a conclusion, I mean, it strikes me as I listen to you that if someone is listening to this, they'd say, this is not meant in any disparaging way, to the contrary. They'd say, yeah, that's logical, that's obvious. Why on earth have we not done these things yet?
I think it comes to us.
Why do we need any more debates? Why don't we just do it?
This is the thing. So what I've spoken to now are the whats, right? So what economic strategy should happen, where the money should come from, and we know the strategies are very sensible and the money is there. So why does it not happen? It doesn't happen. I think there's two things. There's two big things. One is you got to convene the right people to come into the discussion. There's no point having the wrong people sitting at the table who are just going to torpedo the thing. And most of our negotiation, economic strategy, involve people who really weren't putting the money into the programs, right? They were not the one putting the money at risk. So part of the role of the state is to convene the right role players into the conversation. And really, the two key role players, and if I can be very controversial here, it's really government and business. On the sectors, it's going to be the people who put the money in for the renewables and the state. It's going to be the people who put the money in the spectrum, and the state is really representing the people, as it were, on the ground.
Yes.
It's important to have trade unions involved, but not necessarily on debating, who should invest in spectrum. It's not really a union issue. The unions are very important from the point of view of the pension funds because their members sit as trustees. So when there's their money going in, yes, they should be involved because their members are taking a risk. Then you're putting your money where your mouth is. So I think that's one of the things. The second issue that has been very, I think, missing. We will have a jobs fund or job summit discussion. 100 issues are discussed. 0 are implemented. There is no space for enforcement or sanction. So it's the same thing again. I'll take.
Ravi Naidoo, thank you very much. It's been a very invigorating conversation. I'm sorry I had to cut it short, but I suspect we should have you back again and talk about this further. What I'm absolutely sure about is that an audience listening to this would not only be invigorated, but perhaps be extraordinarily frustrated by the fact that some of these obviously excellent ideas have not been implemented. And indeed, they should be in the short term to come if we're going to get out of the mess. Thank you so much for participating in Judgment.